Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but is probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Good day, everybody. This is Susan Elliott, host of Mean Lady Talking Podcast, and today is episode 19. Now, on today's Tuesday broadcast, what I'm going to do is I am anticipating the release of the Jodi Arias appellate brief, which is due by the defense attorneys, the appellate defense attorneys, on Friday. And so I am going to dedicate a few shows after that to discussing the appellate issues, going back to the trial, things like that. One of the things that really bothers me and has bothered me for some time is this hijacking of domestic violence issues from domestic violence victims for people to get a leg up in the legal system, whether it's a criminal matter or it's a family custody case or anything. One of the things that I have railed against over the course of many years has been watching the rights of true domestic violence victims be eroded again. I mean, we didn't even get that much of a benefit to the domestic violence laws when all of a sudden people who were not domestic violence victims started hijacking the very statutes that were designed to protect those of us who were domestic violence victims. And one of the most glaring examples of this has been the Jodi Arias case. It's something that I wrote about, it's something that I've talked about, and it's something that really has bothered me. So when the appellate brief comes out, I'm going to read it, I'm going to comment on it, and I'm not going to have it on a Tuesday or Friday episode. I'm going to do some extra episodes and just fill them in here and there. But as some of you know, one of the articles that I've kept up on my website is about male stalking victims. Now, I understand that the majority of domestic violence victims are females. The majority of domestic violence perpetrators are males. That's just the way it is. But one of the things that came up, not only in the Jodi Arias trial, but also in the Shana Hubers trial, is this idea of male stalking victims who become murder victims. There's too much misinformation about male stalking victims. And I really felt as if the Jodi Arias trial did a great disservice by way of their quote-unquote domestic violence expert, Alice LaViolette, testifying about Jodi Arias being a stalker and Travis Alexander being in fear of his life. Now, if you don't know the history, one of the things that I'm going to tell you is that Travis Alexander was the oldest of several children. His parents were both drug addicts, and there were times in his life when Travis lived as a homeless person, and then he'd go to school and kids would make fun of him. He was bullied over this, and then eventually they went to live with their grandmother. But for many years, he was basically living on the street with homeless drug addicts for parents. Now, that's important in this. Ryan Poston, who was murdered by Shana Hubers, had the exact opposite type of family background. He came from a very well-to-do background. He was very well taken care of. He was living a life that a lot of people would be jealous of. So Ryan Poston and Travis Alexander came from two extremely different backgrounds, but they were both stalked by a woman who wound up killing him. And both Jodi Arias and Shana Hubers had threatened suicide, and both Ryan Poston and Travis Alexander were stuck when their ex-girlfriend would threaten suicide. Now, I want to tell anybody who's listening, somebody taking their own life is their decision. You can't make someone do it. You can't make someone not do it. If someone tells you that they're going to kill themselves, if you break up with them, if you don't see them, if you don't talk to them, whatever it is, it's manipulation and it's not okay. And it's not your responsibility to keep another human being alive. It's just not. I told my youngest son this when he was in the 8th grade and had a girlfriend who was threatening to kill herself if he broke up with her. And I said to him, if she decides to kill herself, that is her problem. I want you to tell her that if she says it again, you're going to tell her parents, and then I want you to stop speaking to her because whatever she does, it's her choice. It has nothing to do with you. So I want to tell everybody out there, please tell anybody that you know, because both Travis Alexander and Ryan Poston had friends who knew what was going on, knew that this ex-girlfriend was threatening things, saying things, all kinds of things. If you know someone who's in a breakup and the ex, whether it's a male or a female, is saying, if you don't talk to me, I'm going to kill myself, please let them know that it's not for them to keep someone else alive. That's too big a burden. It gives you way too much power. None of us should be responsible for keeping another person alive unless we're a doctor in the emergency room. It's just not okay. Now, one of my problems with the Jodi Arias trial was Alice LaViolette, who came on supposedly as a domestic violence expert, and I saw her clearly falling for the manipulation and the lies of somebody like Jodi Arias that I considered a lying, sociopathic, borderline manipulator. And Alice LaViolette went so far as to testify that Jodi Arias was not manipulative. And she called Travis Alexander the abuser and the liar. And this is what is a prime example of someone enabling a non-victim to hijack the hard-won legal gains of actual victims. I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that Jodi Arias is a domestic violence victim. Like Juan Martinez said in his closing argument, she is a liar and she is a killer. And the jury showed some of their hand that they didn't quite believe Alice LaViolette. Arizona is one of those states where jurors can ask questions. And there were many questions to Alice LaViolette about her relationship with Jodi Arias. And the questions seemed to reflect the jurors' belief that LaViolette was biased. A defense expert is not supposed to be biased. They're not supposed to be an advocate, and she clearly came across as an advocate. She was tasked with evaluating the case and not advocating for the defendant, but her advocacy was fairly transparent. I went over her cross-examination over and over again, and it still amazes me to this day that she was as clueless as she was. From the start, she could not and would not answer a question with a simple yes or no. People were outraged on social media because she was paid $300 an hour to sit there and obfuscate, avoid questions, ask questions, sneer, snicker. And one day when the judge admonished her to just answer the question, she said, I'm just trying to give a more effective answer. I'm an attorney and I can tell you that the expert does not get to decide what's the most effective answer. You're an expert, supposedly you're a seasoned expert, and you don't get to answer in a more effective way when the prosecutor is saying yes or no. There are rules for direct and cross-examination. You ask open-ended questions on direct, and you ask questions that require a yes or no answer on cross-examination. None of the rules allow an expert for the opposition to give more effective answers. Most answers on cross-examination are supposed to be yes or no. And the reason why Alice LaViolette could not answer yes or no without implicating Jodi Arias is that she kept going back to this set of facts that did not appear to be true and didn't make any sense. She would say, well, we spent a lot of time on that, as far as questions that were asked of her before. But the reason they spent a lot of time on it was because she didn't give straight answers. The way a trial's supposed to go, and the Jodi Arias trial was ridiculously long, the way a trial's supposed to go is you answer, you move on, and if you damage side that you're supposed to be testifying for, it's up to those attorneys to clean it up. It's not for you to sit there bobbing and weaving and trying to get out of a hole that you keep digging yourself into. The way she denied things did not do the defense any favors. She also never addressed the fact that she lied to the jury. She told the jury that she had testified on behalf of men in a few trials, and it turned out not to be true. She also never addressed the fact that she approached the victim's sister and said to her, "It's not personal." For someone to be a seasoned expert and to approach a member of the victim's family when they're testifying for the defense, she had to know that was wrong. The other thing she did was she said that when she met Jodi Arias, she apologized to her because she had read her personal journal. If you're on trial for murder and you've kept a journal and they call in a defense expert and that defense expert has to read your journal, you don't deserve any apologies. You can't come to court, charge $300 an hour to sit on the stand for days, refusing to answer questions, and then whine that you're a victim. No, you are not. She couched many of her opinions with, well, from the materials I was given, well, from what I know, well, I made a mistake, I misspoke, I was inaccurate, as if her ignorance of the facts of the case would somehow save her from blistering cross-examination, and it certainly did not. She spent 44 hours with Arias, which alone garners her $11,000. And that was without the many hours of reading journals, doing interviews, and spending 3 weeks on the stand. She was paid a lot of money, and then she couldn't understand why people were so angry. She said she had to be treated in the emergency room for anxiety because there was so much hate from social media. But her stonewalling and obfuscation kept her on the stand for much longer than she should have been on the stand. That was adding coins to the till and anger on social media. Her defense of Jodi Arias, who is a fake domestic violence victim, weakens all of us. The social and criminal issues of domestic violence are harmed whenever a non-victim manages to hoodwink anyone, be it an attorney, a judge, a counselor, friends, family, or an expert. Jodi Arias was enabled by her defense experts, and they re-victimized Travis Alexander, they victimized his family, and they victimized real domestic violence victims, of which I am one. Jodi Arias is a narcissistic, lying, manipulative, sociopathic borderline who had her lies and her BS co-signed by a nationally recognized domestic violence expert who appeared utterly clueless and firmly ensconced in the web of deceit that Arias spun. And that is just not okay. There is nothing in her rendition of events that has the slightest bit of truth. She was not a DV victim. She's a murderous, lying, manipulative borderline who should spend the rest of her pathetic little life in jail. And if Alice LaViolette wants to wonder, why is everyone so angry? And what she said in an interview, teary-eyed, how can you hate someone you don't even know? That tugged at my heartstrings because I have been cyberbullied. I have been attacked for no reason whatsoever by people that I don't know. So when she said that very word, I was like, yeah, Alice, I kind of get it. People don't know you. And then her next sentence was, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Jodi. And then she lost me at that moment. Lost me completely. She lost me completely. People don't know Jodi. No, they know what she did to Travis Alexander. And people know the lies she told about Travis Alexander. I don't call Alice LaViolette names. I know she was called fat cow and bitch and this and that. And people know that I don't use those names. Because I believe that name calling and threats fail to add anything to the discussion. Wishing bad things upon her doesn't address the actual issues with her testimony. I don't think it's okay to wish terrible things on anyone or threaten them, no matter what they do. I just don't believe that that's okay. It's just not. So that part of how people behave toward her is wrong, and I will stick up for her in that regard and anyone else. It does nothing to add to the substantive conversation. And when it comes to domestic violence, we absolutely have to have reasonable, substantive conversation, not threats, not wishing terrible things upon people. That doesn't get us anywhere. But her contribution to the Arias trial is still not right. I listened many times, at least 5 or 6 times, to Alice LaViolette's testimony, both direct and cross. And I didn't want to be one of those people who say things about people they don't like or disagree with them or try to destroy them just because. I didn't want to be like people who have attacked me with misspelled emails and misguided attempts to discredit me. I wanted my own criticism of Alice LaViolette's testimony to be fair and well thought out, and something I could sign my real name to. Because the only thing worse than threats and wishing terrible things on people is doing it anonymously. That's so cowardly. I sign my name to everything that goes on the internet. I don't sit in the dark. I don't write anonymously. I don't threaten them. I don't wish terrible things on them. I don't do any of those things. I never have, and I never will. And I think the people who do that are wrong, and I don't care if you're on the same side as me or not. I felt an anger towards Alice LaViolette that I normally reserve for those trying to game the DV laws and non-victims who attempt to hijack important laws passed in order to protect actual victims. But even worse than these villains is a supposed DV expert who A, defended someone who was a psychopathic lying borderline, and B, Alice LaViolette tossed her own credentials out the window to save the psychopathic lying borderline. Another thing that upset the social media crowd on this one was that she was paid so much money. And many people felt that the overpayment was for her complicity in Arias' fake defense and her attempt to destroy the reputation of the murder victim. Alice LaViolette spent a lot of time on the stand refusing to answer the prosecutor's questions, as the Arizona taxpayer was spending $300 an hour to see her stall and move around answers. So you have to understand where some of the anger was coming from. So the one issue that I want to talk about here, and there's so many, and I could go through, and I will go through on other days, issues in the Jodi Arias trial, the original trial. Especially when the appellate brief comes out, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to their legal arguments, and I'm going to then look at the trial testimony and see what it is they're talking about. And I don't know what they're talking about yet, so we'll figure that out. But what I want to do is talk about something that has really bothered me, and that's male stalking victims, which I started talking about at the beginning of this podcast. The public does not know much about male stalking victims and how being stalked affects them, and affects them very negatively. The Arias trial actually was an opportunity to bring that issue to the forefront, but instead it was relegated to the back burner and misunderstood and mischaracterized by Alice LaViolette, supposedly a domestic violence expert. In round after round with Juan Martinez, who was the prosecutor, Alice LaViolette claimed that the murder victim, Travis Alexander, did not demonstrate fear of Arias' stalking behavior. Now, if you're not familiar with the case, Jodi Arias crawled through the doggy door, and another time she slept under the Christmas tree in Travis Alexander's house. But Alice LaViolette claimed that Travis Alexander did not demonstrate fear of Jodi Arias, even though she had multiple stalking episodes. In her opinion, remember, this is a nationally recognized expert opinion, that because Travis did not exhibit fear, therefore Jodi was not a stalker. And it upsets me to no end because both of these conclusions are so very wrong. After the trial, Alice LaViolette hit the circuit doing speeches all about her experience on the Arias trial, all of her experience with Juan Martinez, all of her experience with the social media hate. She called Juan Martinez a bully. She sparred with Juan Martinez. She avoided answering his questions, and she had to be admonished more than once from the judge due to the inappropriate things she said to him. She told him at one point, Mr. Martinez, if you were in one of my groups, I would tell you to take a time out. You do not say that to a prosecutor. I don't care who you are. Another time, she said to him, are you angry with me? Again, completely inappropriate. She made silly grins at him a few times. She did not seem to be bullied. If we apply her own metrics, he didn't behave like someone who was in fear, therefore there was no stalking. She did not behave as someone who was bullied, especially with the snarky grins. No one grins like a lunatic at someone who's bullying them. She didn't behave like someone who was being bullied, therefore there's no bullying. When I was sent a link to the Jodi Arias trial, it was sent to me by a local domestic violence organization, and it was basically promoted as this is a DV victim who killed her abuser. And up until the time she started testifying, I was under the impression that that's what we were talking about. But there was something, even before Arias got on the stand, it was something off about this whole thing, and I couldn't put my hand on it. But one of the things that really bothered me was the way she described the physical abuse. She kept talking about body slam. She was body slammed here, she was body slammed there. I have been in several abusive relationships with men much larger than me and much larger than Travis. And I'm smaller than Jodi Arias by some 4 inches. No man has ever body slammed me, let alone in a bathroom when he was naked and soaking wet and I was clothed. I kept trying to picture this because this was what Jodi Arias said. Travis Alexander was taking a shower. She dropped the camera. He got furious. He stepped out of the shower. Now, remember, he stepped out of the shower onto a tile floor, picked her up, turned her sideways, and body slammed her. And I'm trying to picture this and go, what did you do? Just stand there like a statue? I mean, how does this work? 2 of the men that I was involved with were wrestlers, and Travis Alexander was a wrestler. And one of them was a wrestler and a Golden Gloves boxer. Yet none of them ever picked me up and body slammed me, and most of them were larger than Travis Alexander. And again, I'm smaller than Jodi Arias. I imagine somebody with wet feet trying to pick anyone up would be sliding all over the place. When you're in a domestic violence situation and you've been abused, as she claims she was, you're hypervigilant. You're on your game and ready for things to turn violent at the drop of a hat or the drop of a camera. You go on high alert, and if someone naked and wet is furious and coming after you, don't just stand there, dry person with clothes on, you run. He's going to slip all over the floor trying to get you. You see he's angry and you run. You can't get away fast enough. You wriggle out of his grasp. There was no description of that. Absolutely none. She just basically said, well, he picked me up and body slammed me. I was like, how does this happen? I kept trying to put myself in that situation, and it kept coming out as simply not plausible. He would have had to practically incapacitate her to lift her up, turn her sideways, and slam her on the ground without him slipping or falling or the 2 of them going down. So my question was, did she just stand there like a statue when this naked, wet man was trying to pick her up? There was no struggle, no attempt to get away. That's simply implausible. I thought that Juan Martinez did a great job, but one of my criticisms of the prosecution was that this particular scene was not really picked apart more. And maybe because Ms. Martinez was never in this particular situation. But I kept waiting for him to do a micro-evaluation of the body slam, and it never came. The body slam is just such a ridiculous accusation. I just can't see it. The other thing she said was that the wind was knocked out of her. And I've had the wind knocked out of me. And it's nothing like Jodi Arias described. I had it done to me when I was 14. My boyfriend kneed me in the solar plexus, knocked me to the ground, knocked the wind out of me, and I could describe it in minute detail to this very day. You don't forget it and you can describe it. She couldn't describe it. I also ran any time that I could. The fact that she didn't just run out is so telling. When you're in a domestic violence situation, you run whenever you can. But if you have a naked, wet guy, what's he going to do? Chase you outside? Her entire retelling of the abuse didn't ring true. And for Alice LaViolette to be a domestic violence expert and not question it, not pay attention to it, was to enable Jodi's baloney. And this is why people were so angry. And Alice LaViolette is completely oblivious to her part in this notorious charade. Jodi Arias also said that Travis Alexander said, "Fucking kill you, bitch," after he was shot. The human instinct, when mortally wounded, and a shot to the face is in that category, is not to attack your assailant, but to get help for yourself. It doesn't make sense. And at that point, assault on her and no assault on her, once she responded with deadly force, she was no longer welcome in the home. Any action after that would implement felony murder while criminally trespassing. So any stab after that was felony murder. She stabbed him 27 times. Whether it happened before or after the gunshot is difference of opinion between the defense and the prosecution. But she could have fled after shooting him in the face. In her scenario, she actually could have fled before she shot him. Instead of climbing up to get a gun, you use your head start to go out the door. Wet naked guy's not going to follow. Doesn't matter how angry it is, he's not going to run down the street with no clothes on. Legally, this was not a case of self-defense. It was not a case of domestic violence. She was never in a position to have to use lethal force. The thing that bothers me the most about the Jodi Arias trial is that Alice LaViolette did to Travis Alexander the thing that was done to actual abuse victims before DV laws were passed. She decided what his behavior should look like if he was really afraid. That was how people spoke to us in the days long ago. Well, if he really hits you, why don't you leave? As if it were ever that simple. All the cases that I read before Jodi Arias, domestic violence victims, people that have battered woman syndrome, are people that have been tortured and abused in the same home for years, couldn't leave, they either didn't have any money or they had kids or something like that. Jodi Arias does not fit any of that. And Alice LaViolette talked about the fear Arias had and the abuse she sustained without a shred of evidence, let alone a pattern. The only source of evidence that Alice LaViolette had was Jodi Arias herself. Alice LaViolette made a lot about an email that Travis's friend Christopher Hughes wrote to Travis, calling Travis's treatment of Jodi into question long before they realized how sick Jodi Arias was. Alice LaViolette ignored the opinion of the Hughes's that came after this and how spooked Arias made them after this. In fact, there was so much more proof that Travis Alexander did tell friends that he was afraid of Arias. Arias did not tell a single person she was abused by Travis. The night he was found murdered, her name flew out of the mouth of his friends. Alexander had not only suspected that Arias had slashed his tires, who else would have done that? Not once, but twice. And he did make a police report, but it was never brought up in court. And I assume as an attorney that it didn't come in because it wasn't naming Arias and it was hearsay and prejudicial with no proof. But the fact that he made a police report about his slashed tires is something that most people don't know. And it does exhibit fear of being stalked. Jodi Arias was found sleeping on his couch, having come in through the doggy door, and she was also found sleeping under his Christmas tree. Alice LaViolette kept talking about patterns, but she ignored these stalking patterns to concentrate on what she saw as an absence of fear on the part of Travis Alexander. She characterized Arias' behavior as having a hard time letting go. No, sorry, no, not just having a hard time letting go. I once had a hard time letting go. I've had clients who have had a hard time letting go. Not one of us ever climbed through a doggy door or slept under a Christmas tree. You cannot call stalking a hard time letting go. They are apples and oranges. And it irritated me to no end that Alice LaViolette characterized Travis Alexander as a liar, but had no issues or suspicions of Arias as a liar, even when Juan Martinez asked her not just about all the lies Arias told, but also this wacko claim when Arias said that one of her boyfriends in Oregon was cheating on her, that friends of theirs came into a restaurant and told her about it. Then almost the exact same scenario in Mesa, Arizona, many, many years later. Some friends came into the restaurant and told Jodi Arias that Travis was seeing other women. Any therapist worth his or her salt who can't tell that this is nonsense is completely inept. Arias was a famous snooper, snooping on both of them. She snooped on Matthew McCartney, her ex-boyfriend. She snooped on Travis Alexander, and Travis called her on it. He said, "You're a liar." The two stories are just way too similar, have no names attached to them, and it's impossible for them to be accurate. And none of these people were ever identified. And Alice LaViolette's suspicions were not raised? Are you kidding me? How can you be so easily duped? A fourth grader would say things don't happen that way. For Alice LaViolette to be taken in by Arias's lies and nonsense does a huge disservice to actual domestic violence victims. Travis Alexander had a very difficult childhood. He did not have a reasonable view of doubts and fears. Any children who grow up in the circumstances that he did don't know what are the norms for anything, let alone is what I am perceiving something I should be alarmed about. He didn't have normal antenna. For years, you repress and suppress any of your fear because you can't let it get to you. Not when you grow up in circumstances as he did. It's unclear what his actual perception of her was. He was struggling with that himself. He thought she was a sociopath, and he was more right than not. But his background may have led him to later question his characterization of her. She was a manipulator. She probably spun his head all the way around long before she tried to literally cut it off. People who grow up homeless with drug-addicted parents minimize hurt and pain. They are in survival mode. And part of that survival is to minimize the danger and the fear. They don't know that the world doesn't have to be a scary place. There's no one to protect them. When your parents are incapable of protecting you, you become immune and closed off to the fear and other emotions. No one tells you that being in survival mode isn't normal. People with traumatic childhoods are not sure what to do when they feel attacked, when they feel hurt, when they feel afraid. Travis Alexander strived to have a positive outlook and a positive plan for his life. He could have never imagined what would befall him that awful June evening when Jodi Arias decided to shoot him, to stab him 27 times, and nearly decapitate him. Travis wasn't sure what to do with her. And I know from my own experience that internet stalking and harassment is very real. Even if it's a complete stranger, you have to be vigilant. Many times, friends will give you an extreme suggestion. When it happened to me, my private investigator told me to contact the FBI. I thought that was extreme. I'm like, I don't want to look like a lunatic. You don't want to look crazier than the stalker, and you don't want to bother police with this. You don't really know. I don't know. You don't know who else they're stalking or harassing. Travis Alexander didn't know this. How could he know this? He didn't drive to California. Jodi Arias drove to Arizona. He told her to leave him alone. And a week later, she's on her journey to murder him. And then at the trial, she decided to murder his reputation. And Alice LaViolette was complicit in that, and it was a complete and utter sham. It has been long known that female stalking victims have been killed by their stalk. Laws to protect people have been put into effect after stalking turns to murder. Rebecca Schaefer was murdered in 1989, and it led to stronger laws in California to hide addresses of public figures. It's not a small thing, and it's not unusual. But what is unusual is the small amount of attention paid to female stalkers as murderers and their victims. While we may pay attention to the murder trials, Jodi Arias and Shani Hubers, who's coming up for a new trial, and Jodi Arias' appeal is about to spin into cyberspace, we have done very little to educate everyone about how men can protect themselves if they have a stalking ex-girlfriend or obsessive girlfriend they can't seem to get away from. If you have a friend who is a man who has been complaining about a stalking ex-girlfriend, please, please, please let him know that this is serious. Ryan Poston was a gun owner. He was shot with his own gun. There were guns all over the house. It didn't save him. Travis Alexander was into martial arts. He was into wrestling. It didn't save him. please know that about a third of stalking victims are men. There's enough of them, so there's no excuse for any expert like Alice LaViolette to not have studied the differences in behavior and the reporting of male and female stalking victims. When she was on the stand, Alice LaViolette used a broad brush to paint Travis Alexander's lack of fear as proof that there was no stalking. Her testimony was biased, uninformed, and unbelievable. And at the end of the day, it's just not okay. I mean, even if she was trying to advocate, which she shouldn't have been, for Jodi Arias, or even if she was not trying to advocate, she was just trying to testify as an expert, the way she analyze the lack of fear or the lack of demonstrated fear to show an absence of stalking was wrong. And that information's out there, and it's bad information, and it should not be there. Many people, male and female, minimize fear in order to function. It's a deep reaction. It's hard to demonstrate how fearful you are of anything. I've been afraid of my male stalkers. People come in my house, I'm not shaking like a leaf. I'm not going, oh my goodness, close the door, blah, blah, blah. People wouldn't see me as someone who is afraid. Even females have trouble showing that they're afraid. But you cannot use the same lens that you would look at a female stalking victim to look at a male victim. And you should not hold yourself out as an expert if you fail to study the differences between the behavior of male and female stalking victims. Most men, stalking victims and not stalking victims, do not exhibit fear the same way that women exhibit fear. It's not taught to them. Most male stalking victims, even if they grow up in a functional, loving home, they don't even know if they should feel fear, let alone show it. Society doesn't allow men to talk about their fears or show their fears most of the time. So most male stalking victims don't even talk about it. They don't think they'll be taken serious by anyone, let alone the police. They'll be like, oh, big manly man, are you afraid of a widow girl? Boo-hoo, boo-hoo. I mean, Ryan posted all these guns. Travis Alexander was a big guy, and Jodi Arias had moved back to California. Who's going to listen to them? But please, please, please know that trying to be friends with an obsessive ex, whether you're male or female, is a losing game. And if an ex or a girlfriend that you're trying to get away from is sending you countless text or calls, recognize that it's not normal. Getting Past Your Breakup recommends no contact with all exes after a breakup. It recommends blocking them and getting on with life. And the main reason for that is that you need to separate for healing. If you ever are to be friends, it's not now. But it's even less productive and can be dangerous if your ex has a hard time letting go, or is obsessive, or has been doing these suicidal threats. So don't do it. Don't try to be friends with an ex. Both Travis Alexander and Ryan Poston told friends, I'm afraid she's going to kill herself. I don't know what to do about her. Blah, blah, blah. Listen to a guy that tells you those things. And if you're a guy, don't let an ex manipulate you with crying or threat. Alexander told friends he was afraid that Arias would kill herself. He tried to remain friends with her. Poston told Hubers herself that he stopped trying to break it off because he would fold in the face of her tears. He told her that himself. Gentlemen, if a woman gets teary or threatens suicide, please don't own this. Please, please, please. This is her problem, not yours. Both Travis and Ryan became victims of their own compassion. The best thing to do is ignore threats or crying. You must build the wall, and if crazy ex-girlfriends kill herself or cries herself into oblivion, that's not your fault or your problem. If you're really concerned, call her parents, call her family, call the emergency room. If you're compassionate, good for you, but please spread it to other places and not crazy ex-girlfriends. You must wall yourself off from suicide threats or crying to keep you safe. An expert should not look at, well, he continued to have contact with her, as evidence of a lack of fear, because it absolutely is not. It might be that he's being manipulated into continued contact, and that continued contact will one day become his demise. And don't let the exes know about future plans, especially if they involve another woman. Both Travis Alexander and Ryan Poston have future plans with other women, and that's a very dangerous time. The other thing is that you have to report obsessive and stalking behavior. In his closing argument, Juan Martinez recounted Arias' crazy stalking behavior. And he said, who does that? When Hubers was arrested, she made the famous comment, I gave him the nose job he always wanted. These stalkers do not think the way normal human beings do. If someone's behavior defies believability, chances are you have a stalker. Take it seriously if a male friend reports countless texts or random events like slashed tires from a girlfriend or ex-girlfriend. Try to convince him that it's a sign of stalking and he needs to take action. And if you're being stalked, the crazy is very, very real. Ryan Poston was a gun enthusiast and he was shot to death with his own weapon. His guard was probably down as he had faith that his gun collection would save him, not kill him. Arias showed up at Alexander's house at 4 a.m. He was still awake, but I'm sure his guard was down. He was into MMA and he worked out with a heavy bag. He was in good shape and he was bigger than Arias. Getting into the shower probably didn't seem to be a triggering activity to him. His guard was way down. If you're a family member or a friend of a man who reports fear of some crazy ex or possessive ex, tell him to get a restraining order, change the locks, close off the doggy door, change the code in the garage, and don't let him rely on weapons or his own belief in defending himself. History shows that it's not going to keep a crazy ex from killing him. If you have an ex who's creeping in your house or even creeping on your Facebook page and you feel uncomfortable, tell friends, tell the police, and get a restraining order. Hundreds of texts in the style of Shayna Hubers and crawling through the doggy door in the style of Jodi Arias is not normal behavior. Even if the police try to minimize whatever the ex is doing, ignore them and insist on making a record. Insist on documentation. Unwanted contact, whether you're a male or female, is not okay under the law. Tell the police what your suspicions are and say, I don't need you to justify my report. I just need you to take it. And don't feel the need to justify your fear. You don't want some jacked up so-called expert like Alice LaViolette to explain that you didn't exhibit fear during the trial of the person who kills you. Tell other people about your fears and protect yourself from harm. Not with an arsenal of weapons or belief in your martial arts skills, but with a restraining order and a vigilant approach to keeping the crazy ex away from you. It is very important for those who are victims of stalking to understand that the crazy is very real and you need to protect yourself. If you are a friend or family member to somebody who has this situation going on, please, 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 please let them know. It really is important that we start shedding the light on the very real issues that face male stalking victims. And for a domestic violence expert to get up and say, well, he didn't seem afraid, therefore it wasn't stalking, is absolute nonsense. Crawling through a doggy door, sleeping under Christmas trees, sleeping on someone's couch, all the things that she did is stalking behavior. And nobody was inside Travis's head. Travis had a skewed view of life because of the way he grew up, and it's absolutely inexcusable that anybody could claim that he was not afraid. He was murdered. He was murdered viciously. Ryan Poston was murdered viciously by obsessive ex-girlfriends. And one of the things that people have to get out, and I can tell you, my own son experienced this as young as the 8th grade. We have to educate people. We have to let people know. It's absolutely imperative. Please, please, please pass this information on to anyone you might think needs it. And if you're raising boys, make sure that they know about this. And if you're raising girls, make sure they know about this. No contact after a breakup is for everyone, but it's especially when someone is crazy or claims to be suicidal or manipulative. Please pass this information along. Please take care of yourself, and I look forward to discussing more of the Jodi Arias appeal in future podcasts. If you have any questions, please write to meanladytalkingpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll answer them on this or any other topic.